Now that Christ has set us free and made us heirs of salvation, what do we get to do? And notice that I said, what do we get to do, not what do we have to do? Well, Paul says in Galatians chapter 5, for freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. A yoke. What is Paul talking about? Well, we don't use them so much in our modern day, but a yoke would be like put on two oxen or something to keep them together when they're dragging the plow. That would make sure that the one oxen wasn't moving ahead of the other one and getting the plow line all wonky like. So a yoke will keep them together, bound to one another. But what about this yoke of slavery? Well, a yoke of slavery for the Christian means this. Basically, a Christian has been set free to love and serve their neighbor. But if there's a yoke of slavery, it means that you have been connected to something that's holding you back. And that's what Paul was talking about to the Galatians. They were connected to something, this Old Testament ceremonial law that was causing the people not to focus on their neighbor, but instead to focus upon themselves. So if their neighbor needs something, or if there's something that they, as a Christian who is called to love and serve his or her neighbor, is supposed to do and wants to do as a new and redeemed person in Christ, they can't do it because they're stuck, because they've got this yoke of slavery. And so this is a big deal, because Paul says that a little bit of leaven leavens the whole lump. And he tells them that if they submit to a yoke of slavery in this one area of the law, then they are obligated to keep the whole thing. And so remember that Paul is speaking specifically about the circumcision part here. Go back a few videos and you'll hear all about that. But Paul is using some language here that is quite surprising. It's a little fun reading this because Paul says that if they accept circumcision as a requirement, they sever themselves from Christ. Do you notice that language? They sever themselves from Christ. And then Paul says this, I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Oh my, PG-13 rating on Galatians chapter 5. It's as if Paul is saying, why should they stop at just the part get circumcised? Why don't they just keep on going and cut off the whole thing? Whoa, let's move on. So instead of pointing to the Galatians to these extreme measures, to say your relationship with Christ is dependent upon these extreme measures, Paul lays it out quite simply. And here's what he says. He says, as a Christian, you are called to freedom. Only we do not use our freedom to, serve ourselves. Instead, we use our freedom to love and serve our neighbors. Paul says the whole law is fulfilled in one word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And here's the beauty of that. We can only love and serve our neighbor when the obligation of the law has been taken away. Because you cannot be obligated to love. That's a motivation of the gospel. As a Christian, you are led by the Spirit. The passions and desires of your sinful flesh have been crucified with Christ. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free.